All right. So again, we are on the memory chapter. We talked about what is locality, right? What are the two types of locality? So what does it mean to be temporal locality? Someone else?
When's the most recent thing put in the cache?
So if it was recently accessed,
Most likely.
it's likely to be accessed again in the near future. So most recent things we want to keep in the cache. And then what's the other locality? Someone else.
In a similar area?
So if something is nearby, something that you just referenced, then likely you will access that other piece as well. And we went over a very basic cache, right? And we looked at direct map caches. And we're going to continue on from there. So here is a more realistic cache example where we have a 32-bit byte address. And remember, we talked about the difference between byte address and block address a little bit at the end of last lecture. But now we're going to go into this again, but with more visual. So if I have a 32-bit byte address, and how many bytes are in a word?
32. Go by the 4.
Yeah, cool. So that means that how many bits at the end are referencing the individual bytes in each word?
Two.
Yeah. Because every 4 bytes is the next new word. So 4 combinations, we need 2 bits. So the bottom 2 bits can just be chopped off, and then you have your word address. So here is our memory. Most memory is bytes addressable like this. So you have address 0, 1, 2, and then there's 1 byte of data in all of these addresses. And then if we want to convert the byte address to a word address, then it's just every 4 bytes is that first address. Then the next 4 bytes is the next one, next 4 bytes. And we can get to this number by just throwing away the lower 2 bits of this number over here, right? My number is 0. I throw away the lower 2 bits. My number is still 0, right? Number is 1. Throw away lower 2 bits. Number is still 0, right? 2, throw away lower 2 bits, 0. 3, throw away the lower 2 bits, 0. Okay. Now 4. So 4 is 1, 0, 0, right? Throw away the lower 2 bits. Now it is just 1, right? Same thing for 5. 1, 0, 1. So we see how to translate from byte address to word address, right? So one thing to keep in mind is our block size is not always 1 word. So in this case, we have figured out that our offset to make a word address is 2 bits, right? But if we have, say, a 4-word block on cache, then we have more offset bits, right? So how many offset bits would we have if we have a 4-word block? Well, we can first convert the 4-word block into how many bytes is that? So how many bytes in a word again? 4. And if I have 4 words, how many bytes? 16 bytes. How many bits do I need to address? 16 elements? 4, right? So if I needed the block address for a 4-word block, I would take the byte address and chop off how many bits? 4 bits, right? So again, here's our byte address. Take those lower bits. That's our offset to make a word address. And this offset is not always just a word. Like we just did an example, it could be a 4-word block, the 8-word block. It could be just a 2-word block, right? But usually it's going to be a power of 2, right? Because if we did a 3-word block, then we can't just chop off some bits anymore, right? We have to do a little bit more efforts on the hardware side to figure out what our block is. So we like powers of 2. Okay. So this whole 32-bit address is the byte address. And this is going to be our block address after we chop off offset. Or a word address, if our block is 1 word, offset, if we have byte address, is 2 bits, right? All right. So recapping the direct map cache. In a direct map cache, a block can be in only one location in the cache. Okay? It has a unique spots that it uses. And your cache is much smaller than your memory, right? So you have many different memory locations mapping to the same location in the direct map cache. We determine the index of this location by extracting the index from the either decimal address by taking the modulus, right? Or we can extract it directly from the binary address by grabbing the lower order bits that correspond to index, right? Like it shows here. So here are a couple examples of working with these binary addresses. If we have a cache with 2 to the n locations, where there's n cache blocks, then the lower order n bits of the block address, so this is after we have chopped off offsets, are our index. Okay. So if you are not given the block address, you have to figure out how many of the lower order bits are actually just offset. So it could be a word or it could be a byte address. So you have to pay attention to what you're given, okay? Because if it's a word address, that means that each one of these addresses is referencing 4 bytes, right? If it's byte address, each one of these is referencing 1 byte. So that can affect your offset. Okay. So here are a couple of equations that you can use. I want to put these on your cheat sheet or just through practice, you will know these things as well. So if memory is byte addressable and a block is 2 to the m words, then you have m plus 2 offset bits. 2 offset bits to make it a word address, right? And then if you have 2 to the m words, like our example of 4, right? We talked about 4 words in a block, then 2 to the 2, m is 2 in that case, and we did 2 plus 2. Our total offset was 4 bits, right? Because we had 16 bytes. in a cache block for that example. But again, you don't have to memorize this equation, right? You can just think, what is my cache block size? How many words or how many bytes, depending on if it's a word address or a byte address, fit into that? And then what is log base 2 of that? That's how many bits I need to chop off. But this is also an equation that you can use if you are more comfortable following some set algorithm that you like to use, right? If the memory is a word addressable and you have 2 to the m words, you basically just don't have to include that byte offset. Okay, so it's just m offset bits. All right. So say you're given decimal addresses. You can convert the decimal addresses to their binary form, right? And then you can do it exactly this way. And then you would only have to remember this one way to do it, right? But you can also work with the decimal addresses directly. So this is convenient for us because we're used to working with decimals. But in terms of hardware will always work with binary directly. Right? So for decimal addresses, if you have the block address in decimal, the index is simply take that block address, take the modulus, put the number of blocks in the cache. You are given a word or byte address and a block is not one word or byte, you should convert it to a block address first. So here is our, if memory is byte addressable and a block is 2 to the m words, to get our block address from the byte address, we're just going to divide it by 2 to the m plus 2. If memory is word addressable and a block is 2 to the m words, then we're just going to take a word address divided by 2 to the m. Okay. This is exactly the same thing that we're doing here. Okay. Because we're essentially shifting out m plus 2 offset bits or n offset bits, which is just dividing by 2 to the m plus 2, however many bits you're shifting out. Because every time you shift right by 1, you divide by 2. Okay, so this is the exact same operation. One thing to note here, when you are just throwing away these bits, right? These offset bits are not always 0, right? So we don't have to deal with them when we're directly working with binary. But if we do this division in decimal, we're not always going to get a whole number, right? So what do you do with the decimal part? Just throw it away. Because all the decimal part is telling you is which byte or which word in this block am I trying to access? But all you care about for your cache is I'm going to load in this entire block. So here are now real examples. So we have a 32-bit byte address. Cache size is 1000 blocks. Block size is 1 word. So address consists of what fields? What are the fields of my address? I want to hear from someone that I have not heard from. Tag. What else?
Index and the offset.
It's offset. I heard from you before. Right. So first thing, we have 1,000 blocks. That means that we have 2 to the 10 blocks. Okay, so we have 10 bits of cache index. Okay, this is how many bits we need to index into our cache. So it's bytes addressable memory, but it's a one-word block. So that means how many bits of offset? And someone else. How many bytes in a word? 4, right? So how many bits do we need to represent 4 different combinations? Yes. So offset bits are 2. Right? One block is one word. One word is 4 bytes. That's 2 to the 2 bytes. So 2 bits bytes offset, which is also in our case our block offset, okay? Because we have one word blocks. That means leftover for tag is we have 10 bits for our index, 2 bits for offsets. Out of the 32 bits, we have the top 20 bits are our tag. Right? So now if you're given any 32 bits byte address, and you're giving it in that 32-bit form, you can divide it up, right? First 20 bits are tag, next 10 are in my index, last 2, they're on one, they're just offset, okay? So here is what our tag would look like. So we have 1K addresses, and again, we like powers of 2. So it's 2 to the 10, which is 1,024 indexes, right? We have the valid bits, so 1 bit to say if it's valid. Is this block valid or not, right? 20 bits of tags, okay? And then 1 word, which is 32 bits, right? Or 4 bytes. And if we have an address, 32 bits, right? Top 20 bits are the tag. So when we have the address, we take the top 20 bits, and then we take the index, which are the next 10 bits. Index here. We grab the tag at that index. Is it equal to the tag of this address that we're trying to reference? If it is, and the valid bit is 1, then we have a hit, right? So if we have a hit, that means that this data is the same data that this has in memory. Okay, so we can output that data straight to our data path. If tag doesn't match or valid is 0, we have a miss. Either one of those things. So you see how we figured out what is the breakdown of our addresses, how many bits for tag, how many bits for index, how many bits for offset. And this is what the hardware looks like for a cache. This is direct map. Okay. Are we all comfortable with this picture? I ask you to draw this, you can draw this. And we already talked about this. All right, this is a good question. What kind of locality are we taking advantage of with this cache, this specific cache? Again, what are my two types?
Temporal.
Temporal and spatial. Okay. So let's maybe just answer one of them at a time. Are we taking advantage of temporal locality with this cache?
Yes,
What?
because we're, we had already stored some access.
So if it is the most recently stored, that indexes to this place in the cache, it's going to stay there, right? So if we reference it again, and there was nothing else in between that evicted it, we should still have it. What about spatial locality? How many bits am I getting when I do a load word out of memory? Or fetching an instruction?
32.
32, right? So if I do a load word, say at address 0, right? And say we don't have that data. We have to go fetch it from memory, and then we put it here, right? We would make this valid. The tag would be all zeros. Data would be from memory, from address 0 to address 3, right? Those 4 bytes. And say I'm accessing an array, right? My next address in my array would be increments this by what? 4, yes. So now I'm trying to access memory at 4. My index is the same. Well, no, it's 1, right? It's 1. Valid bit is again 0. Tag is all zeros still. Data is not here. So because my block size is 1 word, I'm not fetching anything beyond the 1 word that I'm trying to access. So I'm not taking advantage of spatial locality with this cache. You need to fetch more than what is being asked for in order to take advantage of spatial locality. So if we had a 2-word block, right, then this data would be 64 bits, right? And we would have 1 less index if our cache was the same size. Okay. And we would only have 512 entries. And then they would both map to the same index. And we would have 1 more bit of offset. Right? So we take advantage of temporal locality with this cache, but no spatial locality. All right, here is another example. Our cache is just 64 blocks. It's got 16 bytes to a block, and it's direct map to what cache index or block number does the bytes address 1200 map to. So work on this one on your own first. What is our code for today? Our code is 148. And just answer A immediately. And then when you are done working on this individually, change your answer from A to B. 148. Most of us are done. And just have a little of over 20 minutes. So let's go over this together. All right. So 64 blocks. That means in terms of indexes into a direct map cache, we have log base 2 of 64, okay, which is 6 bits. We have 16 bytes per block. Log base 2 of 16 gives me 4 bits of block offset. Okay. So then that leaves 22 bits of text. And then since we're given the decimal address, we're going to do this decimal way, but you could convert 1200 into this 32 bits binary address and just grab these, the 6 bits here. Okay. So the first is, what is the block address? Okay. So there's 16 bytes per block. So we're going to divide 1200 by 16 and then take the floor, right? That gives us 75. Then, once we have 75, what are we going to do with it?
Plug it into a cache.
75 is not quite our cache index yet. There's one more step. 75, mod 64, then we have our index. Because all that this step is doing is chopping off offset bits, right? This first step to get the block address. The second step is to figure out which index. And then one thing to note is that this index 11, when we fetch the data, we're going to fetch data from the addresses 1200 to 1215 because we have 16 bytes in our block. So in this case, we will take advantage of spatial lookout. So some considerations to do when making a cache. Larger blocks should reduce miss rates because of spatial lookout. But in a fixed size cache, larger blocks also means less indexes, right? So there's more competition between addresses to fight for those spaces in the cache. So that means increased miss rate. So there's kind of this fight. And then the other thing is larger blocks lead to more pollution if you are not taking advantage of the spatial lookout. So if your application moves around in memory all over the place, you won't want larger block sizes. But if your application is mostly streaming data, like looping through arrays, things like that, larger block sizes will be beneficial. So the other thing is larger miss penalty that can override the benefits of the reduced miss rates. And yeah, so it's also something to consider. Here is miss rate and block size. So increasing block size, y-axis is miss rate. So here we can see if we increase the block size, and these different lines are different sizes of cache. Okay. We initially are decreasing miss rate, right? But as we get to too large of a block size, we have too much pollution. We're not taking advantage of that spatial locality because it's too big. So we end up increasing the miss rate if we keep going. Okay. So here is another example. So 64 kilobyte cache, 4-word blocks. Let's do this together. What is the first step?
Figure out your cache index.
Sure. How do we do that?
Cache size and convert it to log power 2.
I don't think that's quite the first step. So we have 64 kilobytes of cache.
We're trying to figure out how many blocks we have
Yeah,
to
first
begin with.
is how many blocks, right? So we have 4-word block size, right? And we have a 64 kilobyte cache. 64 kilobytes is 2 to the left. 4.
To the 8 to the 8.
Kilobytes. Okay. So 1K is 2 to the 10, right? And then we just need to now get 64. 64 is 2 to the,
6,
so 64 kilobyte is 2 to the
16.
16. Okay. We have 4 word block size. Right?
You have to chop off 4 bits. Or no?
4 bits. How much data is in 4 words?
Only 32 per word. So that's what, 128 bits data?
So 2 to the what is 128 bits.
7?
Yeah, 7, right? So divide, right?
Yes.
I have 2 to the 16 as my total size, right? Each block is 2 to the 7. Right? Divide those two, I get the number of blocks. So the number of blocks is, yes, 2 to the 9. 2 to the 9 is the number of blocks. And then now that I have the number of blocks, what's my number of index bits? Yeah, 9 bits. Right? I don't know if this is the, so 1 word, 1 block is 4 words, 16 bytes, 2 to the 4 bytes. So the first thing it was actually doing is, what are the offset bits? So we could have done this too, right? So 4 words, yeah, is 16 bytes. So 2 to the 4 offset bits. And then we just calculated index, right? So we have the first 4 bits are offsets. Next 9 bits are index. That means how many left for tag? 4 plus 9 is 32 minus 13 is, yes. So here was our calculation. So 64 kilobytes divided by 16 bytes blocks. Wait a minute, 1 second. So kilobytes, are we 16 byte blocks? 4 word block size. 4
Or 16.
And what was I told before? Why did we do 7?
Is,
16.
yeah, I think I did the math wrong.
Okay. Well, anyways,
Yeah.
this was the step, right? We wanted to divide the total size by the size of block. And that gives us how many index,
10 plus 2.
right? And then 32 minus 12 minus 4, then it's just 16 bits of tag. So here are our address components. Tag is 31 through 16. Index is 15 through 4. Block offset is 3 through 2. Because we have 4 word blocks. And then byte offset is 1 through 0 because we're byte addressable. So this is what this cache looks like. All right. 16 bits of tag. 12 bits of index. So we first figure out what is the index, go there, right? And then once we're at that index, we look at the valid bits and we compare the tag, right? If this matches and this matches, then the data we want is one of these 4 blocks. I mean, one of these 4 words. right? In this 4-word block. These two block offset bits tell us which one of these words is the one that we wanted, right? So we put all 4 of these into a mux. And then the block offset is used as the selector for that mux to give us the correct block. The correct word, right? So here is another example. Consider this series of addresses given as word addresses. 22, 24, 25, and 20. 16 word direct map cache 1-word blocks. Use the cache index of each reference and label it as hit or miss. Okay. We are given word address, right? We have a 16-word direct map cache. So how many, and 1-word blocks, how many indexes do we have? Yeah, 16. 16 words is our total cache and 1-word blocks. So we have, if we want, we're given decimal, right? And we're given word addresses. So to convert this to index, we take 22 and mod 16, right? So 22 mod 16, what do I get? 6, yeah. Initially cache is empty, right? So we need to
fetch and load the data.
load it, right? Then 24. So this was a miss, right? 24 mod index is, yep. So again, it's empty, right? Initially, there's nothing there. So this is again miss. 25, 9, and this is again, and then 20, and again, miss, right? 6, 8, 9, 4, right? Now, what are the results if we are assuming a 16-word direct map cache with 4 word blocks? So with 4 word blocks now, how many indexes do I have?
Four.
4. 4 times 4 is 16. So now what is my first step with these addresses though?
Convert them to block address.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes,
I have word address. How do I get block address?
divided by 4, because there's 4 words per block.
So 22 divided by 4. What do I get?
5, 5, 5.
And take it on 4.
So 5, essentially. And then
Get a mod.
5
1, 4.
mod 4. So into index 1, I'm putting what addresses? Into index 1 of the cache. What addresses go in?
Oh, you're talking about like the 4 addresses that are going in?
Mhm.
Oh, okay.
Which 4 words go?
Yeah, maybe 20 to 23, I think.
Yeah, 20 to 23, right? And that one again is miss. 24 divide by, I get, and then mod.
Next 2.
So was there anything in the next 2?
No.
No? And now what goes into index 2?
That is
Yes, 24 through 27. 25 divide by,
6.
Hmm.
And we'll hit, because we have that already.
because again, 6 mod,
4 is 2.
and we have something in index 2. The tag
Is back.
would have been the same. And in our cache, we have 24 through 27. So we now use the block offsets to tell us that we wanted the second. The second item, right? Because the first one in that block is 24, the second one is 25. Now 20 is 5 mod.
4 is 1.
Mhm.
We
Yeah.
have the valid tags.
And it matches.
Matches. Okay.
So here are our block addresses, right? Divide by 4. And then we're going to modulus it to get index 1, 2, 2, and 1. And this was missed, but this was hit, this was hit. Right, so this was our example of spatial locality. Yeah. All right, so some other things. We have split caches. This is splitting instruction cache and data cache. We have higher miss rates because they are just small individually, right? But there's no conflicts when accessing data and instructions at the same time. So that means less misses as well, right? And we also have higher bandwidth due to separate data paths. Combined caches. This is lower miss rates due to this much larger unified size. But we're possibly going to stall due to simultaneous resource access, right? And we have lower bandwidth because we're sharing this resource. So in most modern processors, you will see split caches. And handling cache misses. On a cache hit, CPU is very happy, right? It doesn't have to stall. On a cache miss, we need to stall the entire pipeline. We have to wait for this data. We need to fetch the block from the next level of the hierarchy. And if we have an instruction cache miss, we need to restart the instruction fetch. And we are also just stalling until we have that data. On a data cache miss, we need to complete the data access. So again, we're stalling until we have that data. So what about store word? So writes are about 21% of data cache traffic on average. So because of this, we optimize our cache for reads. And we do writes on the side. So one thing is when we are writing, we must be sure that we are updating the correct data though, right? So on a write hit, there are a couple things we can do. We can just update the block in the cache, but then the cache and the memory would be inconsistent, right? Cache is updated, memory is not. But the other thing you can do is called write through. We update the cache and memory at the same time, so it's consistent. This makes writes take longer. So here's just an example. Base CPI of 1, 10% of instructions are stores, and writing to memory takes 100 cycles. So base CPI, 10% costs us 100 cycles of stalling. My new CPI is now 11. So the solution to this is a write buffer to avoid these stalls. So rather than writing the data immediately, we hold the data and the CPU will continue and the data will be written when it can, when the memory is not being used. And it's only going to stall on the writes if the write buffer is already full. So this is the other way that we can do this. It's write back. So on a data write hit, we just update the block in the cache. And then we keep track of whether the block was changed or not. And then when it is evicted or replaced, then we write it back to memory. This is better performance, but more complex to implement. All right, so here is your reading for next time. And again, from path performance, that header until the end of 7.2 and 7.4. And I believe this is your last reading of the semester. I believe.
That makes me feel like I don't know math, but not being simple. Multiple